Distractions. Anyone who has ever prayed for any length of time has run into the problem of distractions. Can this problem be fixed? Well, yes and no. In order to answer this question, we need to look at the different reasons why you're distracted in prayer and how to respond appropriately in each of those scenarios. I'd argue that there are a variety of different reasons for being distracted, and each of those reasons, those circumstances, benefit from a different response. So today I'd like to share 8 different reasons with you why you may be distracted in prayer and how to respond. The first reason you may be distracted in prayer is if you have lost your former love, if you've grown lax in your spiritual life, if you've been neglecting daily prayer, if you have perhaps let new sins creep into your life. This could potentially be the reason you're distracted in prayer. You may have just lost your motivation to pray. It's maybe just no longer that important to you, but you're still perhaps trying occasionally, and then maybe you get frustrated when it doesn't go very well, and then you sink even further down into that rabbit hole. If this is your situation, you may have lost your motivation to put all of your heart and mind and soul into prayer, and that's why it's perhaps difficult for you to stay focused. If you are ready and willing to change, now is your opportunity to turn back to the Lord with your whole heart. Seek His forgiveness, change your ways, and strive to be faithful once more. Another reason you may be distracted in prayer is that you're sick. If you're not feeling well, it's going to be exceptionally difficult to stay focused in prayer. If you're really sick, you may want to consider whether it's prudent to just rest instead of taking your usual prayer time. If you're just a little bit sick, you may still be able to take your prayer time as long as you just humbly acknowledge that your mind is probably not going to be as sharp as it usually is. In that case, be gentle with yourself and offer to the Lord the little that you can, and allow Him to take your loaves and fishes and multiply them. It's ultimately up to your discretion whether you are too sick to pray, so to speak. If you're struggling with that question on a regular basis, it may be worth discussing with a spiritual director or a priest or a friend or a loved one who might be able to give you an outside perspective. Another reason you might be distracted in prayer is that you're tired. Whenever we're tired, it's much more difficult to get our mind to focus on anything. And so one practical way to deal with that is make sure that you are positioning yourself in a way that is not likely to lead you to fall asleep. So avoid lounging on the couch or in a recliner or laying down in bed. Praying in one of those positions is just going to be harder to stay focused, and you might actually just fall asleep. So I would encourage you to consider, maybe would it be better to kneel or stand for your prayer, or perhaps just sit in a less comfortable chair. If you're praying first thing in the morning and you're dealing with tiredness at prayer, you may want to consider whether you are going to bed early enough to wake up on time for your prayer and feel rested. If your prayer time is important to you, you may just need to adjust the time you go to bed to ensure that you are well rested and refreshed and focused and ready for your prayer in the morning. Or perhaps you are getting enough sleep, but maybe you try to pray the first thing when you first wake up. Maybe you just need to allow for a little bit more time and space between when you first wake up and when you start prayer. Maybe you just need a little bit more time to wake up, and then you'll be more attentive. If you're praying at night, and nighttime is the time where you have decided to spend your more substantial amount of time in prayer, and you're struggling with being tired, you may want to reconsider praying at night. You might want to consider finding a time earlier in the day to pray. I know that's not always possible. As a father of several young children, sometimes you just have to take what you can get. And if that's your situation, then you might just need to make the best of it. But if you have the opportunity, it might be better to pray earlier in the day if you're trying to pray right before bed and falling asleep every night. Another reason you may be distracted in prayer is that your prayer space is not well suited to staying focused on the Lord during your prayer time. Your lighting may be distracting, maybe it's too noisy, or perhaps there's too much clutter in the room that you're trying to pray in. If this is your situation, I would recommend you check out the other video I did on how to spend time in prayer with God. In that video, I take several minutes going over how you might set up your prayer space to best stay attentive and focused to the Lord during your prayer time. Another reason you may be distracted in prayer is technology and media. Our cell phones can now be filled with all sorts of prayer apps and Bible apps and ebooks and spiritual music. And if those things are useful to you and you're able to use them without being distracted, then I'd say go for it. But if you're the kind of person that can't use a prayer app without being excessively distracted by all of the other things on your phone, then you may just need to find a different way to support your prayer time other than your phone. If you use music to help you pray, you could turn on the music on your phone and then set your phone on silent and put it out of arm's reach so that you can't get to it during your prayer time. If you like to read the Bible during your prayer time, you might just want to get a physical Bible. If you like to do some spiritual reading during your prayer time, again, maybe just get a physical copy of that book. I would say the other, perhaps more significant way technology can damage our prayer time is more how we use technology outside of our prayer time. If your attention span is habitually fried from excessive media consumption, you're going to find it very difficult to calm your mind in prayer and give your attention to Jesus. He wants to meet you at prayer time, but you also need to work at becoming more present to Him during your prayer time. Prayer time can occasionally be magnificent and beautiful and captivating, but more often than not, prayer is never going to be as exciting and stimulating as social media and TV and movies. I'm not saying you should never enjoy those things, but if you want to take your prayer life seriously, I would recommend that you look at how you consume media and consider whether it may be excessively impacting your ability to stay focused in prayer and give that attention to the Lord so that you might be present to Him and receive the gifts in prayer He wants to give you. Another reason you might be distracted in prayer is that there is some significant event going on in your life that's difficult to ignore during prayer time. It could be something difficult, like a loved one is sick, or you're struggling in a relationship or a friendship, or you're having trouble at work. It could be something joyful and beautiful, such as a new project that you're excited about, or a new friendship. My advice in these circumstances is to bring that thing that is occupying your attention to the Lord in your prayer time. Let that become the subject of your prayer time. Talk to the Father about it. Share with Him your joys or your fears. Share with Him the good and the bad. If there is something big going on in your life, you can guarantee that He wants to be with you in it. He wants to celebrate your joys with you. He wants to encourage you and help you when you're struggling. And it's okay to bring those things to Him in prayer, especially if they're occupying our mind so much that we feel like we can't focus on other things in prayer. That's probably the thing that you need to focus on the most. Another reason you might be distracted in prayer is that there's something you have to do that just keeps coming to the back of your mind and you're worried that you might forget it. In that case, I'd recommend that you just write it down, whether on your phone or on a piece of paper. If you've written it down, you can rest assured that you're not going to forget it when prayer time is over. You can go back to it later, and just writing it down on a piece of paper or on your phone or wherever it may be may help you just set it aside mentally, and then you can forget about it for the rest of your prayer time and come back to focusing on the Lord and being with Him. A final reason I will offer that you may be distracted at prayer is that the way of prayer you have committed yourself to may no longer seem to be a good fit. Perhaps it feels unnecessarily difficult to keep praying in that same way. For example, maybe you, for the longest time, have been praying a rosary every day in prayer, and now it just seems excessively difficult to focus on that rosary. Perhaps you've been meditating on scripture in a certain way, or perhaps you've been singing songs of praise and worship. Whatever it may be, you can fill in your own example. Now you're finding it much harder to focus on this thing. Your mind is wandering. You'd rather be doing something else. If this is your situation, first, if this has only happened a few times, I would encourage you to stick it out for a little bit longer before you write off a way of prayer. Building consistency in our spiritual life is incredibly important. You don't want to allow yourself to bounce back and forth between different spiritual practices just to keep up a level of excitement and fun. The life of a disciple of Jesus is not always exciting and fun. Sometimes it requires us to do hard things or difficult things, or sometimes just boring things. You need to build spiritual muscles that enable you to stick with it through the difficult, through the boring. And sometimes in prayer, that means offering to God a sacrifice of praise. I'm going to stick with this thing because I know it's good for me. I know the Lord is meeting me here. And I'm not going to judge the value of my prayer time based on the way it makes me feel. Second, I would also encourage you to consider the other items on this list first. There may be a more practical reason why you're struggling to stay focused in that way of prayer. And finally, if you've considered those 2 points, if you've confirmed that you are regularly getting distracted in this way of prayer, and you've considered the other items on this list and none of those really seem to fit, it may be time to try praying a different way. If you've always been praying the rosary every day, maybe meditate on scripture. If you've been doing some spiritual reading during your prayer time and you're struggling with that, maybe try praying the rosary or singing some songs. There's a rich banquet laid before us in prayer, and there's nothing that says we always have to choose the same thing every time. It's better to try a different way of prayer than abandoning your prayer life altogether because it was difficult to keep praying the same way every day. In closing, despite all this, I want to tell you that you'll never be fully free from distractions in your prayer life. Don't set that up as a goal. You'll never get there. Distractions are a common part of everyone's prayer life. It's something that we all have to wrestle with. And as I discussed in my other video on what prayer is really all about, the heart of prayer is really about what God does in us, not what we do for God. So don't convince yourself that distractions mean all is lost. God's grace is ultimately what matters more. His grace is what makes prayer fruitful and effective, not my ability to focus with perfect attention. So let not your heart be troubled when you encounter distractions in your prayer. Do what you can to mend the more obvious problems I mentioned earlier. Strengthen your intention to be with the Lord in prayer, no matter what happens, and offer it all humbly to Him. Now, there is another reason why you may be distracted in prayer. You may be distracted because your prayer has become habitually boring, dry, and dark. I don't have time to go into this today. It's going to be the topic of several videos coming out in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for future videos on those topics. And if you'd like to be notified when those videos are posted, you can subscribe to the channel, The Catholic Disciple, down below, and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. That will notify you when those videos are posted, and you can check them out then. So that's all I have for you today. These are my tips on how to deal with distractions in prayer. But what about you? Is there something I didn't mention that you have found helpful? I invite you to share your favorite tips in the comments down below. You never know who might find them useful. May God bless you in your prayer and give you His peace.